This is our ESB 2026 player rankings, as today we'll be covering the top 10 designated hitters in Major League Baseball entering the 2026 season. And gentlemen, Joe, Corey, I appreciate you guys joining me today to talk DHs. So half the family at least is here to talk about the designated hitter spot, which is a weird position to always cover here, Corey, only considering the fact that at any given point, any of our DHs could step back onto the field. At any given point, somebody who's currently projected to be a starting player in the field may become a DH at some point and gets the majority of their ABs at the designated hitter spot. So I guess as a preface here, Corey, I guess the fair warning to give is like, this DH spot is pretty flexible. And that's why I think we have to cover it now before people down the line, when they look at our next player rankings, are like, well, where'd you put that guy? Well, he was back in our DH ranking.
Yep, exactly. It's a great one to cover right towards the rip because, like you said, it's some of these guys do play the positions periodically throughout the season. They might get like 50 games at a position, but predominantly at the DH spot. We do our best to go off of Fangraphs when trying to build the charts to put these rankings together. So we do our best. Again, you're going to see names on here that you saw on other positional lists last year. You'll see a couple of guys in here who have been here for a few years now because they've been predominantly DHs. But again, it's a weird position, a lot of fluctuation year to year. But maybe not so much towards the top, but we'll find out later tonight.
And before we get into our 2026 list, let's look back at what happened in 2025. I expect not much change with some of these players that have just held down the DH spots for their respective teams. It is curious to see Marcell Ozuna there at the number 5 spot last year, recently signed his deal with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And then there's the big man, Giancarlo Stanton. He's been in that position. Well, not the 7th position, but he's been in these top 10 rankings consecutively ever since we started our player rankings. So very intriguing where Giancarlo Stanton's going to end up tonight. But let's get started with our designated hitters rankings list, our new top 10 for 2026. And I'm going to throw it to none other than Joe Pugliese to talk about our first 3 players on our top 10 list.
Yes. All right. So starting off our 2026 rankings is Seiya Suzuki of the Chicago Cubs. If you notice on this graphic, he was number 6 at the start of last season. He's down to number 10 this year, but that doesn't mean that he had a bad year last year. 32 home runs, 103 RBIs. He had 245 with 326 on base percentage. He's a very potent offensive bat, right-handed offensive bat in that Chicago lineup. So he starts our list off at number 10. Number 9 is a Tampa Bay Ray, Yandy Diaz. Diaz has been not on this list previously, but 25 home runs, one of the few 300 hitters in MLB at 300 with 366 on base percentage and 848 OPS last year. One of the forces, he flirts with 300 every single year in the past 4 years. So really one of the mainstays in the Tampa Bay lineup. And number 8 is one of the most intriguing names on this list. That is Mike Trout. Mike Trout often found himself in the top 10 of our outfielders list, but the last 2 years has moved over to DH. Last year, 26 home runs, 64 RBIs, 232 batting average. He played 130 games. It was the first time he did that since 2019. So the question I think we all have with the list, and the most intriguing name on this list, is what are the Angels going to get out of Mike Trout in his age 33 going into his age 34 season this year?
And as we kind of prefaced earlier, there is talk that Mike Trout could also be getting a lot of time out in right field. We were really basing Trout's position here on the amount of DH at bats he did get last year. Joe Adell really stepped up into his own had a breakout season for the Angels in 2025. So Trout's here in our DH list. So it's nice to see him in a top 10 because, it's Mike Trout, and who doesn't love Mike Trout, but it's not in the look. It's a light DH class when you get to the bottom half of the top 10. But I think there's more of just that. Yeah, what kind of Mike Trout are we going to get at the end of the day that's going to show up? Because if this player taps into any portion of what he once was, you're still talking about a top 20 player in all of baseball, Corey.
Correct. I mean, Mike Trout, phenomenal career. But when it comes to this list specifically, the question is, how much is it because he performed really well, and how much is it because of its name recognition? I mean, he had the most games played last year, 130 total since 2019. It was also his lowest OPS pretty much of his career. So I think he might be here more so for his name than his production. I think we're towards the twilight years of Mike Trout's career, and I could see Diaz and Suzuki potentially have better seasons than Mike Trout. But it's hard to discount the legend that he is. I hope to see him in a couple more lists in the years to come, but time will tell. Time will ultimately tell. But let's see who's above Mr. Michael Trout on this list. We got the 7, 6, and 5 slots. Christian Yelich, he's making a return on the list this year. Previously, he was number 9 overall. He's up to number 2. It was a nice year for Yelich. 2024, he did miss some time due to injury, but he came back last year, 29 home runs, 103 RBIs, and a 795 OPS. Again, this is a guy who's in the second half of his career, and his best days probably behind him. But if he can stay healthy and purely DH, get out of the outfield, just go ahead and swing the bat, I think we could see several more years of this type of production for Christian Yelich going forward. So I do expect to see him on this list next year as well. Eugenio Suarez was a very interesting free agent this year. 49 home runs. How many 40-plus home run hitters? There was a few, but you don't see too many of them hit free agency. And he ended up only getting a 1-year deal, $15 million. You got to wonder how much of that was because of his collapse post-trade deadline. When he went to the Mariners, his OPS was only 682. So for a guy hitting 49 home runs over the course of the season to have an OPS of 682 in that 2-month stretch with the Mariners goes to show how bad he was as an acquisition. But the Mariners, we'll see if they regret letting that power go, and if the Reds will like to see that pop in their lineup. And then finally, there at number 5, George Springer. We've seen him a few times on outfield lists. Again, another guy, a lot of these guys, you can see a theme here, older veteran players who used to play different positions, primarily outfield so far that we've covered. But due to some injury concerns and getting older, shifting to the DH spot. And he was a big piece for that Blue Jays lineup. He had his second best career OPS last year at 959. Again, that was his best since 2019. So you're seeing a lot of players like Mike Trout, most games played since 2019. George Springer, best OPS since 2019. A lot of guys here, as they make that long-term shift to DH, starting to become a little more productive since they could stay in the lineup more frequently.
Joe?
Yeah, and Springer's the really interesting one out of this group because he was 35 years old and had his best season maybe he's ever had, hitting 309 with a 399 on base percentage. He slugged 560. He hadn't even come close to that since 2019, the season where he had 39 home runs for the Houston Astros and was an all-star. So the question is, at age 35, is that an outlier year, or is that something that he has now embrace the fact that he's a full-time DH, he can only focus on hitting, and he's healthy? So can he get more years like that out of it? Because if he does, that transforms that Blue Jay lineup. If he does a little bit more of what he did in 2024, where he's hitting 220 and hitting 19 home runs, that's going to be a big production drop-off versus what he did last year. So that's one of the more fascinating names on this list.
And yeah, with Anthony Santander starting the season off on the IL, and early reports he's going to be out for a little bit, Springer becomes a little bit more of an important presence in that batting order, even given the fact that he's going into his age 36 season. Was actually just looking on past lists. George Springer wasn't even featured in our top 30 outfielders list last year when he was primarily an outfielder. So this was a big jump for him to go from not being featured on an outfield list to now being featured, number 5 prominently in our DH list in 2026. All right, we're going to move forward into the top 4. But before we even get to revealing number 1, we got to start off with our 4, 3, and 2. And in our number 4 spot is somebody who takes a little bit of downtick, more just to deal with the fact that he wasn't really available last year. And that's Yordan Alvarez. And the thing about Yordan Alvarez, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it, Yordan Alvarez, when healthy, can always threaten for an American League MVP. In fact, last year, going back to our prediction shows, he was actually a bad prediction, but he was my AL MVP pick early into 2025. And unfortunately, didn't pan out for Yordan. He only played 48 games last season. But again, it's just one of those benefit of the doubt years. You can't knock what this guy did for 4 straight seasons between 2021 and 2024. 24 as recent, 35 homers, 308 batting average, an OPS of 959. So good enough to still stay here in our DH list. And Alvarez may play a little bit of outfield, but I think in his best interest to keep him on the field, he'll be probably better suited at DH in Houston. Brent Rooker, mainstay at the number 3 spot for a second consecutive year in a row. Rooker, I mean, he's been an incredible force in the Athletics lineup, when the Athletics were a really bad team, but we're starting to see a trend now out in Sacramento where the Athletics got some really good players now in their batting order, and Rooker being one of those guys who is a mainstay in our DH list, but I have a feeling not the only Athletic you're going to see in these top 10 lists. Rooker coming off a 262, 335, 479 batting average, an 814 OPS, 30 homers, 89 RBIs. That wasn't a batting average. That was a 479 slugging, I meant there. And Kyle Schwarber at the number 2 spot. Schwarber moves up 2 spots after being an MVP finalist, finished second in the MVP last year to, I'll save that for a couple of minutes. But Kyle Schwarber, another big season for him, 56 homers, 240 batting average. We're not looking at batting average when it comes to Schwarber. The guy's just a pure slugger, 928 OPS. And honestly, I say Kyle Schwarber is a pure slugger here, boys, but all these guys fill out that textbook slugging DH there between these 3 and Schwarber, Rooker, and Alvarez.
Yeah, and you touched a little bit on it with Alvarez. He's such an interesting guy because if you look back to 2024, he had 308 with 35 home runs in 147 games. And that was his career high in terms of games played. But he's hit 33, 37, 31 home runs, and he's missed significant time in all those seasons before that. So last year, obviously, only 48 games. He only had 6 home runs. But this is a guy who's a game breaker. And if he's healthy and can play 140 games, he's got a chance to challenge for an MVP. It's going to be interesting. He kind of screws up our system a little bit, but the bat, when he's on the field, is so incredibly elite. It's undeniable what kind of talent. You kind of have to bank on the fact that eventually he's going to run into a healthy year. And that's why he's on this list as high as he is, even though he missed significant time last year.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm building a team from scratch, I'm going to go with Yordan Alvarez over either of these 2 players. The only reason I went with Rooker 3 and Alvarez 4 in my personal top 10 ranking was for the consistency from Brent. Look at the last 3 years for Rooker. He had 30 home runs in each of those years. You look at last year, he played in all 162. So even though I think Yordan Alvarez definitely has more upside potential, I think there's more consistency with Rooker, and I just trust him to deliver this coming year a little bit more because I just feel like he's going to be on that field the whole year. I hope Alvarez is, and if he is, he could certainly challenge Ohtani or whoever might be number 1 on our list. But I just want to see Yordan get through a full healthy year, get back to hitting 40+ home runs. And once he does, he'll make that jump for me.
And you mentioned that number 1 that I feel like we're walking on eggshells not talking about. So Corey Favs, why don't you just do the honors and reveal the number 1 DH going into 2026?
Yeah, and I mean, listen, it's an absolute no contest. I think when everyone tuned into this episode, you could figure who the number 1 would be. It's Shohei Ohtani. Shohei Ohtani is the face of baseball. He's the best overall player in baseball. You can make the case that Aaron Judge is the better hitter, and I would I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. But Shohei Ohtani is the best player in baseball, bar none, because of what he brings to your team. Obviously, the dangerous bat, and he could also be dangerous on the mound. He's had 3 straight years with an OPS over 1.0. That is absolutely incredible. So to get Shohei Ohtani anywhere outside of number 1 on this list, it just wasn't feasible. This guy is. I don't see anyone jumping him, honestly. I mean, Jordan has the pop that I think he could make the jump back to 2. But it would take a lot for him or anyone on this list to jump Ohtani, barring some sort of crazy injury or an unexpected slump. He is the face of baseball. He is the number 1 DH in baseball.
He's a unicorn. It's one of those where it's just like an absolute guarantee. You don't have to think twice about it. He's your guy that is in this spot. Like he's held it down now since the beginning of our player rankings, and he'll continue to hold it down as he keeps his production up. And even if he's half the player that he is right now, I still think he's in the number 1 spot. I mean, this is an incredible baseball player, and love him, hate him, it's an absolute blessing to get to watch him play baseball here in the 2020s. But yeah, let's take a look at the overall rankings here again. Suzuki, Diaz, Trout, Yelich, Suarez, Springer, Alvarez, Rooker, and Schwarber. But I gotta throw it to my favorite graphic now. I call it the money slide. This is really the money slide. Let's take a look at the individual rankings. And look who's in the top corner, in the top left, right there. See, there you go. Sierra not giving a goddamn about Shohei Ohtani. Got Giancarlo Stanton in the number 1 spot of the designated hitter. I was really hoping Sierra was going to be here to make this, to explain herself, but I mean, I really don't think there's any explanation. I think we kind of know Sierra and her affection for John.
Yeah, we got to do Olympic judge rules and throw out the highest score and the lowest score. My shock here is that Tom didn't even have Stanton on his list, which is crazy.
He did not.
No, Tom. And that would be the biggest question we face, because Stanton obviously had an incredible 77 games that he came back for. But for me, I did have him 10. But at the end of the day, I think with Stanton, the biggest question with Stanton becomes, can he be on the field long enough to make impacts throughout the season? Mm-hmm. And if you also look at his year, similar to the conversation we just had with Judge Springer, is what he did last year an outlier year for him? The previous 3 years, he batted combined .211 in his previous 3 seasons. He hasn't played 140 plus games since 2018. His last high was 139. So I think that's the biggest question with Stanton. I think that's the biggest question we're all going to get is why isn't he on this list? And I think that's part of the answer. And again, guys have that question. Trout has that question. Springer has that question. Mm-hmm. Even Alvarez, we just talked about, has that question of whether or not he can be healthy. I think with Alvarez, the difference is we know when he's on the field what he's going to produce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think, I'm looking at mine here, and we're talking a lot about Stanton. He was you look at the 9 that I picked that were on our list, and there's one outlier. The outlier was Mike Trout. And I actually had Stanton over Trout. My biggest reason being is, listen, both players, I don't necessarily trust them both to be on the field for a long stretch of the season. But the stretch that Stanton did give last year was high quality production. I mean, he had a 944 OPS. Now, again, I don't know if he's going to put up that same number this year, but I thought he was more impactful in the time he showed last year as a DH than Mike Trout. Don't get me wrong, love Mike Trout, nothing but respect to him. But I gave the slight edge to Stanton because at least he looked elite while he was on the field.
Yeah, 273 batting average for Stanton, 24 homers in 77 games, 944 OPS. So really did a fantastic job when he came back off the injury. And as far as we know, and at the time of this recording, Giancarlo Stanton's going to be healthy going into spring training, and that he is looking to be the starting designated hitter. So it is a little interesting that Keith had Ben Rice in there in the middle of his list, who is slated to start at first base. I don't know if he's just kind of protecting himself in the case that Stanton goes down with that injury, and then Rice slides into that DH spot. So very curious why Keith went Rice there. That's another conversation at the time. Yeah, for me, if I'm including Mike Trout in this, I had to include Giancarlo Stanton. Like, it made no sense to include one and not include the other, considering the fact that Giancarlo Stanton simply played more games than Mike Trout over the last years. And I get it. Compare the both of them at their very best, you're going to get a better production from Mike Trout. So that's where my slight edge to Trout goes over Stanton. But one thing that I'm very curious on, I feel like since Giancarlo Stanton for the first time in a long time had a pretty poor postseason performance, a lot of P's, a lot of alliteration. I wonder if that took him off a few top 10s. I wonder if he had continued that dominance after the season he had, which is a good season. He would have been featured in everybody's top 10s here.
You could see that case with Tom, because I know when we were talking about our starting pitchers, which I had a little while ago, he had Yamamoto 1. No one had Yamamoto 1, and his big reason was that postseason success, doing it in the biggest spot. And then you look at the list here, Tom was one of the only ones to not have Stanton on the list, despite being a Yankee fan. So it's possible that postseason run last year could have played a role, in addition to just the general thought, is he going to stay healthy for a full season?
I'd be surprised. He's been so good in the postseason his whole career. I think this is simply about just how many games he's playing and the fact that last year was such an outlier compared to his previous 3 seasons. To expect that from him coming into 2026, for me is a hard expectation. Just like I don't, Tom has Springer really high. I don't expect Springer to hit 309 this year. Like I put him on my list, but I would be at age 35 going into age 36. That's a lot of expectation for those players to do that at their ages.
Yeah, totally agree. But that is your designated hitter list going into the 2026 season. So with that, we will call it another episode here of our ESB player rankings. Well, we'll see you around for the next one. Make sure to stay tuned and stay subscribed so you get the latest and greatest on when our player ranking lists get all released. So make sure to stay tuned to us, and we'll see you for the next episode. Take care.